You started Next Up with Adam Breneman in 2019. Since 2019, you've had a lot of amazing guests. I wanted to play a game with you real quick. So I picked out, let's see, six of my favorite guests that you had. And I'm going to list them off one by one. And I want you to tell me what is the favorite thing that they either said to you, or the favorite piece of advice that they gave you, or maybe the most important thing that you learned from that guest.
I like it. You're gonna challenge me on this one. Let me. Okay, let's go. I'm ready.
All right, let's do it. So one of my favorite episodes that you had was Jersey Jerry, and everyone knows him as the Barstool guy. He's hilarious. He's amazing at social media, but he also has a backstory that it unfortunately is true for a lot of people. He went through a lot of dark times. Highly recommend that you go check out that episode between Adam and Jersey Jerry. So Adam, Jersey Jerry, what was your favorite thing that you learned from him?
Man, that dude's been through a lot, and I didn't even know his whole story. I mean, Jersey Jerry was a drug addict, and his life was in a bad spot not that long ago. And it's to think about where he is now: tenacity, grit, hard work. He tells a story in the podcast about he just needed to get a job. When you're coming out of rehab, no one wants to hire you. You have no skills. How do you get a job? And he tells a story of lying on applications, saying that he was I forget, it was a plumber or an electrician or whatever, saying that he was an electrician or a plumber. And then when he got the job, the person that hired him, he's told him, like, listen, I lied to you just to get the interview, but like, I need a job. I'll be the hardest worker I'll do it for basically for nothing. And the crazy thing, and like the whole thing of fate, is that the guy that hired him was actually also a recovering drug addict, and it really revived his life. So you guys should definitely listen to that podcast, not just because it's on my channel, but Jersey Jerry has an awesome story of kind of second chances and revival at life, and he's certainly making the most of it.
RG3.
What am I supposed to do? One word on these, because I'm definitely gonna ramble
No,
on these.
the floor is yours, my friend. As long as you want. I know you have a time constraint, so
No, we can go past it a little bit.
okay. RG3.
RG3, man. RG3, it's funny. After I interviewed him, I remember flying. I flew in to see him, so I flew there. I forget where. I think he was in Texas or something. I flew in there. On the way back, I remember thinking to myself, that dude is so unapologetically himself and so comfortable in his own skin. Like, he's just him. RG3 is just him. He don't care what anybody says. He's gonna say what he wants on TV, talking about orgies in the end zone and like just saying whatever he wants. It's really commendable, and he has an energy to him, and like a just like an appreciation for life. Like, he's just fun to be around, and you can feel it when you're in front of him. First time I had met him, he's also definitely an awesome dude and fun to be around, and is himself. And everyone loves people who are themselves.
Michael Penix.
One of the greatest stories that I remember in my time covering college football. I mean, what that dude's been through and how he continuously got back up and got back up and got back up. I mean, 3 injuries in a row. You mentioned it earlier, but I'll never forget that line he said. I asked him, why'd you keep going? And he said, I couldn't let my little brothers view me as a quitter. And think about that decision he made in that time when he was at Indiana and got hurt 3 years in a row, and everyone wrote him off and no one thought he'd make it. The decision to keep going ended up being the most prosperous decision of his life, to end up on the Heisman Trophy stage and to really, I mean, you talk about a guy who's completely revived a college football program. Washington isn't where it is today without Michael Penix Jr. So he's definitely one of my favorites that I've had on, and he's been it's been cool to build a relationship with him. Just saw him at the Super Bowl actually. My company Mercury, we did a tribute video, and he, after his last game, kind of a tribute to his career, and he mentioned it to me, so it was pretty cool. But he's a special dude.
I have to ask because I have a big UW fan in my life. Andrew, if you're listening to this, this is for you.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on Penix as a draft prospect?
Yeah, I think he's got all the talent in the world. His issue is going to be that he's left-handed. It can be an issue with NFL GMs because you got to flip an offense. If you're going to be left-handed, you got to be QB1. No one's going to have a right-handed starter and a left-handed backup because you got to flip your offense. They got to be able to rep in practice. So There's challenges to being a lefty, but I think he's talented enough that someone's going to take him, pretty high up in the draft, and he'll get an opportunity to make an impact in the NFL. He has all the talent in the world. I mean, the anticipation, the arm talent, the velocity he throws with. He's special. He's just a left-handed quarterback, which is pretty rare.
Yeah. I've heard rumors that, Seattle might be looking at him. It makes sense with the location and all that. I'm a Niners fan, so that would be worst case scenario for me because I am also high on Penix.
Are you recovered yet from the Super Bowl?
I'm glad you asked because I'm not. Let me tell you, man, I've been watching sports for a long time. That was far and away most heartbreaking loss I've ever experienced in my life. My brother and I were watching it together. I still think he's not recovered either. It was tough. I'm not recovered. Some guy tweeted, he was like, that loss killed sports for me. And honestly, I don't know. I might be at that point.
I thought for sure the Niners were going to win. I was walking around on Radio Row all week just telling everyone, hammer the Niners, hammer the Niners. So, yeah, you guys let me down. You guys let me down big time.
Yeah. All right, 3 more real quick here. Will Compton.
Oh, Will was awesome, man. Well, that Will may be my favorite interview I've done. He just pulled up to the Airbnb we had in Nashville, and we just were shooting the shit, and he was rolling. Having a podcast host on your podcast helps because they know what you're trying to get, and he was just ready to talk. So he was really cool. That was honestly, I look back on kind of my career to this point. That was one of the podcasts that I feel like kind of like put us on the map a little bit because it just went, got tons of views on social media and everything. I think he told a bunch of great stories in that show. He talks about his NFL career a bunch and just how he continuously had to show up continuously as a practice squad, journeyman linebacker. And he tells the story again. Not to rehash the whole story, but he tells a story in the podcast about that you guys should go listen to at the end of it about pulling his hamstring in practice one day and thinking he was going to get cut from the team. Decides to gut it out and just like practices even with a pulled hamstring, and ends up having an interception that day in practice. And that moment when he had the interception, because he chose to practice through it, changed his whole career, ends up getting signed, and then ends up having a long NFL career. So the theme on a lot of these stories is that everyone that we've talked about has been through some shit now. It's never easy. There's always some adversity. There's always things you got to get through. There's always negative stuff. Everyone's going to go through things. It's all about how you respond to the negative.
Love it. 2 more. Kenny Pickett.
Man, Kenny was a long time ago, it feels like. Kenny was my first podcast guest ever. I mean, you mentioned 2019. I did do a podcast like briefly in 2019. It was all virtual. And then when I really ramped up was 2022. 2022. So Kenny was my first guest in that kind of second version of my podcast, and he was getting ready for the draft. I'd say for Kenny, like a appreciation, I appreciate Kenny for coming on my podcast when he was projected to be a top quarterback drafted, and I'd never done a podcast before with any quarterbacks, and had us into his home, and I've known Kenny for a while. My high school coach was his quarterback trainer. He's known my brother for a long time, but Kenny's a really, really cool dude, down to earth, humble, and is exactly the perfect guy that fits in well in that Pittsburgh Steelers franchise.
Last but certainly not least, Jared Goff.
Jared Goff was fun too. I don't know Jared as well. I actually, one of my Penn State teammates, Jason Kabinda, helped me get Jared Goff on that episode, where a lot of these other guys I've actually known or have a great relationship with, like I don't know Jared that well. I don't know him. I never talked to him outside of the hour and a half on my podcast. But that's kind of the beauty of it, right? Like we sit down there and we're just hashing it out for a long time. I would say Jared has a really cool demeanor to him. He has that like LA, California vibe where like nothing phases him. He's cool. He's calm, collected. And more so than anything on the podcast, like it was a great show, a great interview. But just what he's been through in his career and how he's been doubted and counted out a lot of times. And he was traded out of LA and told he wasn't good enough. And I think there were times where Detroit didn't think he was good enough and has just continuously battled and showed up, and eventually it works out. And now to see him have the success he's had and to be the leader, the unquestioned leader of that franchise for the first time in his career, has been really, really cool. And I love the T-shirts and what Dan Campbell said. The quote is that, what is it? You're good enough for Detroit, Jared Goff. And I think that's a pretty cool thing and a pretty telling symbol of his career.